Welcome to the Sacred Seat. Today we're going to be talking about sacred service and what that looks like in all different capacities. So in our personal lives and how we show up with our careers or our heart-led businesses with the intention of being of authentic service. As always, I am Melanie and I am joined by a few lovely people today. Anna, how's it going?
Hi, happy to be here and excited about this topic. We are joined by my dear friend Alex, who I've got to had the pleasure of working with over the past few years now, and he's been become a very good friend of mine. So I'm really excited to have him here. Alex is a business coach who helps entrepreneurs unlock their true purpose and freedom through shifting at the level of consciousness. Alex has been an entrepreneur for over 10 years himself, starting multiple companies in the realms of marketing, retreats, and community building. Today, he is focused on helping health coaches and professionals bring their magic to the world at large. He is a partner and the lead in the Soulful Sales company, helping to guide a community called the New Earth Health Pros on the School platform. Underneath it all, Alexander is focused on being the best father and husband he can be while helping build a new world for all of those around him. So welcome, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Alana and Melanie, for both having me. It's a real treat to be able to connect with like-minded and like-hearted individuals. So just really honored to be in your space and excited to see where we go.
Yeah, it's my first time meeting you. This is our first time crossing paths, so I'm excited.
Virtual. There's a lot of people that I've virtually met only, and then you meet in person in real life, and it's like, oh, this is interesting. I know so much about you, but I've never physically met. So I look forward to the time that we get to physically cross paths.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so wonderful that we live in a world where we can meet people virtually, but it's still a little bit strange to think about, that you can connect so much deeper with someone online sometimes than you can with people you meet in person nowadays. So Alex, we just want to kind of dive in a little bit on, your backstory on how you got to be where you are today and helping soul-led entrepreneurs and health coaches. Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, I'll try and give you maybe the 2 or 3 minute condensed version. But growing up, I felt a calling towards service in some kind, or if I had to verbalize it back then, I would say I just want to help people. And so I thought I would venture into the realms of emergency services. So I looked at becoming a firefighter or a police officer, and I discovered that I have a red-green color deficiency. Not quite a color blindness, but enough to deter me from some of the tests that are required to go in that space. And one of my good friends, he said, hey, you're great with people, why don't you go into business? And so that was enough of a synchronistic nudge to send me to business school. And from there, I got what people would think is a dream job, great paying salary, fancy title. I bought a fancy sports car, and over the next couple of years got to travel all around North America, ascending the ladder and making more money, getting fancier titles, and becoming less and less fulfilled, less happy, becoming less healthy, and consuming increasing amounts of alcohol, which was heavily tied into the sales environment. And so that it wasn't quite it was very far from a dark night of the soul, but it was definitely quite lonely and confusing because I did what everyone told me to do. And from that place, I came across an author by the name of Tim Ferriss, read some of his work, and it really inspired me to start to consider what it would be like to design my life to my likings, to my passions. To possibly do something that helped other people. And so if that period was me living quite in my ego, I felt like I needed the pendulum to swing. So I quit that job to everyone's dismay, and I went to India to teach English at a small school in the mountains, in the Himalayan mountains. And that was a very transformative experience because the energy that I was met with there, or the people that I met, they were so beautifully open-hearted and generous. A lot of these people didn't even have a proper door on their house, and they would give me, the kind of the quote unquote rich Westerner, anything that they had. And so they seemed quite happy. There was these really beautiful family bonds. And then I came back to North America, and a lot of my friends have started to go into finance and find success, and they had a lot of monetary freedom, but I noticed that they were far from fulfilled and happy. So that became my North Star of, I want to build a fulfilling, purposeful life for myself, and possibly, if I figure it out, help other people do the same thing, because I witnessed so many people being unfulfilled and not really contributing that much to the world to help or to bring about evolution in any capacity. And so when I was in business school, I concentrated on entrepreneurship. So I started to pull on some of those threads, started writing business plans for people, doing a little bit of consulting, copywriting, and I just really kept pulling that thread of wanting to be free. Traveled around the world with my laptop. Definitely wasn't, making millions of dollars, but I was paying for the travel. Spent some time in Bali, Thailand, Australia, Europe, coming back and forth between Canada and these different places in the world, trying to figure out where I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. And in the background of this, when I was learning more about the business world, I was diving deeper into personal development. So I spent a couple years in the realms of Tony Robbins, trained under his modalities, and there's a really beautiful energetic or spiritual undertone to that community that most people don't realize. And so that started to open me up a little bit more. When I was in my early 20s, I had my first intentional psychedelic experience. That opened me up a little bit further. I had a unfortunate but fortunate injury where I received quite a large concussion. That drastically shifted how I felt or how I perceived the world, and then I started to really embrace this idea of living in a more conscious way, eating different foods, meditating on a regular basis, working a little bit more with some of these plant medicines, and those just kept combining more and more and more up until the point where I met my former and current business partner, Dan Harrison, and we started a business together a week after meeting. And through that environment, decided to launch my first program on my own. And that was the very first time that I publicly talked about combining personal development. I don't know if I said spiritual development on the onset, but that was definitely part of it, and business, marketing, things of that nature. And so that went really well. It was my favorite thing that I've ever done, and I've been pulling the thread on that ever since. So that's a little bit of how I got here, and obviously there's a lot of side tangents and stories that contributed to who I am today. But since that time, I've obviously met my partner, which was a really beautiful synchronistic meeting, a remembrance really, and we were lucky enough 15 months ago to welcome our first daughter into the world. So that's a really big part of my driving force and purpose as well. There's been a really big evolution since married and also becoming a father. So that's a little bit of how I got to this present moment talking to you two.
That's so beautiful. I get so excited when there's people living lives that I respect and admire, and then they have babies. I'm like, yeah.
Totally. It's interesting because I don't think I'd ever really heard your story like consecutively like that from start till finish, and so I loved hearing that progression over time, because I know we've connected little bits here and there on our walks and talks and things like that. So thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, thanks for holding a space for me to share it. And it's really interesting because I've told the story a couple different times to clients or on different podcasts, and it's interesting because every time I tell it, I almost see it or feel it in a different way myself. And in some of the work that I do, some of it is, focusing on the past, like reflecting on what's happened and trying to see these little miracles that we didn't realize were miracles at the time. This idea that life is happening for us, not to us. And so every time I tell that story, I see another little wink from the universe that got me here. Which at the time maybe felt confusing or frustrating or painful or whatever the case may be. So yeah, it's really grateful to be able to get to continue to share that and learn about myself.
Absolutely. That's a big part of doing the work, really doing that inner work is going back to those parts of us that maybe didn't fully integrate the experience the first time, and getting that opportunity to integrate it now. And I love that plant medicine has been a part of your journey. Obviously, Melanie and I at Alchemia, that's our goal with this business and what we've created here. So I'd love to hear a little bit more, if you don't mind, diving a little deeper into that, how plant medicine has shaped your journey.
So I'll have to thank Tim Ferriss again. So I'm thanking him on a couple different fronts. I should really, shake his hand. One or two of his podcasts, he brought on different experts in the realms of psychedelics. And I can't remember what podcast it was in particular. I should go back and figure it out. But there was one very in-depth podcast that talked about doing this deep personal work or transformation with the help of psychedelics, in particular psilocybin mushrooms. And so I listened to that, and some of my friends, we were going up to a fall trip up to a cabin in Northern Ontario. And I heard this podcast, and these were some of my friends that I worked with in the hospitality industry, and they were always down for an adventure. They might have labeled it as like a good time or partying, but they were down for an adventure. And they had experienced working, I won't say working with, but they had consumed mushrooms before to alter their states of consciousness, but probably more in a party setting. And so I just invited in, like, hey, would you want to take one of the days and, consciously consume these things? Like, we can bring journals, we can bring games. And so I didn't know what to bring. We brought a whole bunch of stuff. And yeah, they were into it. And that day felt like one of the longest days I've ever experienced. It honestly felt like 30 hours packed into one. And we made some tea in the morning, set some intentions in the best way that we knew how, or that I knew how. And yeah, over the course of that day, it was just opened up to a completely different reality, a completely different perspective. And I remember feeling some deep emotions around, in particular, my two friends who were a couple. It was kind of later in the day, and they were sitting on the other side of the room, just holding each other, kind of staring into each other's eyes, that type of thing. And I remember just sitting there and being like, wow, that's so awesome. Like, I am so happy for them. I am so grateful they found each other. I am so grateful to know them, and to, just like a lot of this gratitude. And that was particularly impactful in retrospect, because I don't think I felt a lot of intense emotions from the ages of, let's say, 8, 9, 10 years old up until, my early 20s or mid 20s. And in retrospect, again, likely from the passing of my mother that occurred when I was 9, almost 10 years old. And after that occurred, I think I just really went inward. And it wasn't into like a depressive state or anything like that. There was just this shell that I went inside. And for example, I got really confused when people were crying at funerals. It was like, oh, people die. Like, what's the big deal? Like, why is everyone getting their feathers so ruffled? And that's on one end of the spectrum. And maybe I was also confused of people crying with tears of, but you won an award or you did whatever. And so that was one aspect that that revealed itself to me, along with connection to nature. We were outside for most of the experience, just overlooking this lake and seeing patterns in the waves, and just spending time together as friends and connecting. So that experience happened in my kind of early mid 20s, and then there was a couple years that went by, not intentionally integrating it, but integrating it. And then when I moved to Kelowna, about 7, maybe almost 8 years ago now, the as soon as I got here, I was immediately introduced to a couple of people that were somewhat consciously working with plant medicine. Again, it was kind of like in between recreation and intentional and conscious. But then I started to, every other weekend or every month be going into ceremony and doing this deep work. So that was a intense period of transformation that started to occur there. And that eventually led me to being open to sitting with Aya for the first time a couple years after.
Beautiful. I love, or what at least I'm picking up from your share, is this gentle step-by-step progress, which I love hearing in someone else's experience because it's really similar to mine in a lot of respects. And I think people often expect spiritual awakenings or a spiritual journey to have really big culmination points, like really dramatic initiations. And while sometimes they do, a lot of the time it's that slow introduction, that step-by-step, that weekend with the friend, or like that willingness just to explore a little bit over here and learn more over here. And I love hearing about that gentle exploration because it's so, I think, real and relatable for a lot of people who aren't experiencing these, I sometimes call them come to Christ moments, where it's, wow, a revolutionized whole new world immediately, very storybook and fairy tale like. So it's nice to hear that there's it's not just me having those slow tiptoes into world altering ways of existing.
Yeah, it's I think that especially now that a lot of people are sharing their spiritual experiences online, let's say. And so people are consuming all this content of like, oh, this is what happened when I took mushrooms and I met this three-headed deity that told me my past, present, and future. And then Jesus was just hanging out beside him. And, and then someone ingests some plant medicine and they just have a really beautiful, gentle experience. Like, oh, I didn't meet the three-headed God person, so I don't know, maybe I did it wrong, or my experience wasn't powerful enough, or maybe I need to take more. So I've even felt that before too, being in an experience and catching myself trying to almost hyper-inflate what's happening to make a better story later. And so I really try and get away from that if I'm in ceremony or I'm in retreat, to not get into so much storytelling with the...
Hugely, yeah.
Yeah, I so relate to that, like chasing those big moments. And those big moments, yeah, like they're great, but they're also more challenging to integrate. So it's like when we kind of have the slower ones, the slower shifts, the slower changes, it's like the integration becomes that much more, not simpler necessarily, but it's a little easier to do, little shift, little shift, little shift. Yeah, so I find that really
bite size.
Yeah, exactly. Bite-sized bits, really, right? We love to bite off more than we can chew and have those like big moments. And I find myself sometimes like creating expectations around what a journey is going to be, and then that kind of cuts you off from what it actually is, and the beauty of some of those simpler things, like you said, like gratitude, even, like how simple it is just to be grateful for the love around you and the love of the people around you and nature. And that's what we're all searching for, is that feeling. So why does it have to come from this big, massive firework event? Can't it come from the simple things that are all around us? And how much more sustainable is that in the long term?
I think it speaks to that human part of us too, because this is transferable outside of a ceremony setting. The amount of times in my life I've believed that my new business should look a certain way, or I should be X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, oh wow, this is not the experience I thought I should be having in this moment. And it brings me back to one of my favorite grounding concepts, is the most sacred thing is what is. And that's gotten me through a lot of moments of those doubt or those criticism, like that self-leveling to other people. It's just like, nope, I'm doing right what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm in my lane.
Yeah, pretty much all suffering is resisting.
The irony is the moment you accept what is usually the moment it transcends and you move on to the next thing. But that resistance to accepting it, of like you said, warping it and wanting it to be something that it isn't, and overinflating it, and creating almost like delusions around it is like really can keep us stuck.
So, in the larger concept, I think, of sacred service, I know with coaching and with your work with people who are starting businesses and bringing in almost that egotistical pursuit, like you mentioned, which is a very natural, normal part of our human development, I think, of trying to find our place in the world, what we do like, what we don't like. It's a very exploratory, the fool archetype energy for me of just, what am I doing? I'm going forward. And connecting that into some kind of heart-centered, authentic, dharmic path of service, or of actually providing something of value. I'd love to hear some of your insights around the trend that I think the world is experiencing, and that I'm very grateful for, of everybody wanting to have more of a heart-centered connection to their work, or realizing maybe that the egotistical pursuit of a job or a career or things that ought to make you happy isn't really hitting home for us. It's not really being fulfilling in all of the ways we might be longing for.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, whatever verbiage we want to put around it, whether it's a new Earth that's emerging or consciousness is raising on the planet, I think it's very hard to argue that that isn't happening in some capacity, just based off of the shifts that we're seeing in the spaces of, let's say, energy work, plant medicine, and other sacred services, just based off of pure interest or desire alone of people that are gravitating towards those spaces. I think that's a strong indicator externally of the internal shifts that are happening, and it's going to be different for every single person. But when you go inward and you start to ask these big questions, the biggest question, which is, why am I here? There's a couple different ways to approach that, and the way that I prefer to approach that is that this incarnation is on purpose. That I am here on purpose. That I chose to incarnate into this line with the parents that I have. And if that's the case, then I'm here to do something or be something or learn something. There is meaning to this madness. There is meaning to the suffering. There is somewhere to go. There is a North Star. And I don't know if most people would be able to verbalize it in that way, but I think more and more people are feeling that pull or that calling, especially as you see the world become more fantastical or more hilariously unbelievable at times. And, through the 2020 shift that occurred, I think there were so many people that just, whether they watched the news or they were just looking around their own community, be like, something doesn't make sense. What I believed to be oiled, functioning machine that is society, something is amiss. There is, the Wizard of Oz seems like maybe it's not what he first appeared, and maybe there is someone behind that curtain. And I think all these little, either conscious or subconscious questions that emerge are really, really powerful medicines that lead someone to wanting to live a more heart-led or heart-centered life. And inevitably, when you start to connect to your heart and create from your heart and lead from your heart, it is going to invite you into holding space or helping others in some capacity. So I think there's people that consciously are feeling and choosing that path, and I think there's an even larger group of people where there's some unconscious shifts that are occurring, and they don't know exactly why, but possibly it's also because of the death of the American or the North American dream that seemed to have occurred over the past, let's say, 20 years. And one of my favorite examples of this is that most people, 20, 30, 40 years ago, there was a dream that you would have your own house and that you could work at a job and possibly save up enough and one day become a millionaire. There's this shiny number. And now you look at the average price of a home in Canada in any city, and it's probably, more or less worth about $1 million. And this financial North Star that people used to have has lost its glimmer and its shine. And a lot of people believe that would bring them the happiness and the success and the fulfillment they desire. And they're starting to realize that that's not the answer. And they're starting to realize that they don't love the job that they're in. And then maybe they don't love the city that they're living in. And all of these different external factors are inviting them to look inward. And, I think probably the three of us could agree, anytime we do that,
I wholeheartedly agree. Especially in a world, I think, where we're so driven to look externally. You're speaking with the American dream and these achievements and these measures of success and these markers of things that then promise some sort of comfort or happiness. When those things start getting taken out of the reach and you can't get your needs or your comfort zone easily met externally, it's almost, you start to be left with no other option. If no one's standing there telling you what to do to be happy, you're like, oh, now what? Now where do I go?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really interesting with this path of sacred service. I think the one thing I can kind of see that's really common across all people that seem to step onto this path is that the outside doesn't seem to be what it appears like what you thought it would be. Like it's different than what you thought it would be. And so there's this discomfort or this dis-ease or this disillusionment that kind of occurs with the reality. And it's kind of a challenging path. And I love that you brought up 2020 because, I think that's the biggest prime example where we experience that on such a mass level, like the whole world, where everyone's kind of like, well, what is really going on right now? And it was uncomfortable and it was scary and it wasn't easy. And so I think sometimes we think path of service and we think the spiritual path and we think all love and light, but it is diving in through some of these darker, more challenging aspects of ourselves that we find that authenticity and we find that heart of what we actually want to be doing and what actually matters in this world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know who sold the idea that spirituality was going to be sunshine and rainbows, but they are lying. Well, it can be one day when you'll get there. It's all part of it, but I definitely can relate to, I guess, the almost like compartmentalization that occurs in the world where there's a business Melanie and a relationship Melanie and a family Melanie. And I think something that comes to mind when I talk or think about sacred service is a lot of the time we're trying to put that into just a career or just some external thing we do for money or e-commerce or transactional. And I think there's a piece about that gets left behind sometimes as we're talking about this authentic work that's required in order to get to a place where you could be of sacred service, right? And it's a lot of that inner journey inward to your soul to develop and to practice those skills, to figure out who you are, to navigate the world around you, to then come to a place where you have your true kind of essence to offer to the world. And I think people get discouraged before they can get there sometimes, to be like, no, you can do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously, if you want to, let's say, be the person that's holding the sacred space and service of a medicine ceremony, there's a path to walk. There's initiations to be had. But that's not the only way to be of sacred service. When someone decides to walk this path, and you're going to the coffee shop and there's someone that's on a different path than you and they're asking for change out there, and say you don't even have change, right? Maybe giving change is your way to be of service, but maybe just making eye contact with them and giving them a smile and saying, I see you, you're a human being, that's service, right? Holding the door an extra second for someone when you don't have to, that's service. Even I remember this is a clear memory from the 10-day silent retreat that my wife and I did. And we were in Mexico. And outside of the door, there was this ant nest that got disturbed, and there was ants everywhere. And so people were kind of like rushing in and out. And the teacher that was leading the retreat, he said, hey, like, if you can, please avoid stepping on the ants. Like, why would you not? Like, if you can, don't do any extra harm than you need to do. And it's not like we need to walk around and be light as a feather and make sure that we're not even stepping on a microbe, because death is a normal part of life as well. But he was saying, like, hey, like, if you can, place your foot where there isn't an ant. And in that way, I see service as this like embodiment of, okay, let me see if I can bring more love, joy, compassion, and equanimity to everything I do and say, and every space that I go to. And if you choose that path, your role in that world will naturally evolve over time. Where you
Sure. Yeah, it's not an external role to put on, and it's just a way of being, getting to that.
Yeah, it's almost more like a whole field of vibration you're stepping into. It's not just putting it on in one circumstance and not in another. And I think that's how a lot of people view it, especially when we're kind of talking about this, with you working like coaching health coaches and working with that. We think like, oh, those are just like one role, but I don't think people realize like that what you do, and same with plant medicine, is like it's a very holistic process. It's the whole life. It's working on every aspect of your life, every aspect of your being. And yeah, stepping into that field of vibration, of service, of authenticity, of soul-led living, that's in every moment you have to show up that way. Absolutely.
Yeah. You don't have to be a yoga teacher to be of service. Like, there's no job criteria that is the service role. Like being someone who is lit up from the inside out, giving someone a cup of coffee, that person is in service, doing the highest good. And it is a gorgeous frequency just to bear witness to. For example, gardeners. I love watching someone whose like soul is on fire to plant seeds. I'll eat your food any day, man. Tell me about your squash. There is like potent magic in that, because it's not about being the CEO. It's not these measures of societal success that we have really, I think, been trained a lot of the time to view as the thing we ought to be doing. But it's like, no, there is glory in being a janitor, man. There is glory in picking up leaves and garbage off the side of the road. And I think that's the difference in that living authentic life path, is because humans, the soul was never designed to succeed in some external linear structure like that. We're just all here to do what we're here to do. And sometimes that's growing a damn good squash.
Absolutely. Yeah. What comes to mind as well, too, is one of the most popular spiritual mythology stories or lineages that's prevalent in North America, which is the story of Jesus. And, whatever someone's perspective is on if it's factual or fictional, I think a really important piece of the story is that, Jesus was a carpenter by trade. He wasn't the emperor. He wasn't the king of this. Sometimes he's a king of something, but he was a carpenter. And then as he started to step more into this role of divinity, or this like Christ consciousness, there's so many stories where he's washing someone's feet. It's like this seemingly insignificant, maybe low level task or role that has been connected to a story of the highest expression of being in divinity. I think is one of the major.
Yeah, literally humble service, to do things for others from a place of love from your heart. I think that would be what I would define as sacred service from the heart, doing this as an act of just true love. And that often looks really humble.
Yeah. And when you're in that vibration of love, it's like, it's not only like it's beneficial to everyone around you, but it's also beneficial for you too, right? Like, it's not even like doesn't feel sacrificing. It doesn't feel like that martyr archetype that can kind of come in sometimes when we talk about sacred service. It's like what is best for you is what is best for the whole, and they are one and the same. And what, you know, so you get to like see how things really work and play together in that way. It's like everything kind of aligns and finds its place, and yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm. There's a really great example of that. One of my mentors and good friends, Ron, him and his wife play the gongs together to do sound healing, and sometimes they bring their friend along who plays the didgeridoo. His name's Didgeridoo Dave, and I forget how old he is.
I love him already.
Yeah, he's great. Didgeridoo Dave's amazing. I forget how old he is, but he's definitely, you know, he holds the elder role, and he has had health issues off and on, and I think he was you know, working with some type of cancer as well. And so we were having an event, and they're like, oh, I'm not sure if Dave's going to be able to come because of his health. I'm like, okay, yeah, no problem. And then he shows up and he's there. Like, wow, like amazing that you're here. You totally didn't have to. And he said, I am so excited to be here and to provide these healing vibrations for everyone else because it heals me. That's the only reason that I'm still here, is because I'm able to give this to other people. Just that watching of, you know, love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sacred service fuels you, right? Fuels everybody.
Yeah, it's built into
That's
it.
really beautiful. I knew I loved him.
It's a really sweet story.
It is. It brings me to the next thing I think I wanted to get into a little bit, is to talk about how we can be best fit for service. Alana talked a little bit, you mentioned the martyr dynamic, and even Didgeridoo Dave. Dave? Yeah, that almost willingness to, I guess, in a way, put others first, and not in that martyr type, but in that just an overabundance of love, you know, when your cup is so full it overflows. But there is a certain element that a lot of healers have that wounded healer archetype, and I just want to talk a bit about being fit for service and making sure, or exploring the dynamics around what we can do to be of like true good service to other people. And I guess that involves things that maybe block our way on the path to being of service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a really, really great topic to dive into. And, you know, with that phrase as well, being fit for service, definitely, you know, shout out to that community, which my wife and I were part of, or I guess we're still part of it. And that was a really interesting example to see how they approach that topic, which would be, especially when we were more involved in the in-person events, would have been from like preparing your mind, body, and your soul, right? So doing the hard work when no one's looking, doing the preparation work, where, as a basic example, let's say someone's lifting weights every day. They're lifting weights and they're getting their body stronger and stronger and stronger, and then one day they're walking down the street and there's like a large dumpster that's fallen on a child's leg, and in that moment you're strong enough to be able to lift it and to help them, and you didn't know that moment was coming, but you have been cultivating this physical strength in preparation of being of service. So, and same thing would apply for the mental gymnastics that might be required, or the spiritual fortitude that might be required to be of service. And going off that idea, I think this is it's a big area of friction for people that start to walk this path of purpose, of soul purpose, of living from the heart, because they start to pour out on the other people, and then they start to feel burnt out themselves, depleted themselves, and then someone tells them about the analogy of the oxygen mask. And you got to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can help other people. Totally makes sense. So they start to help themselves, and some weeks or some months go by and they feel isolated, they feel lonely, or they feel like they're not doing what they're meant to do, so they go and they try and help people again. And they play this teeter-totter back and forth of self-depletion and probably, half-hearted service, right? If you're not fully in the place where you're able to give it your all. And I really like this idea of being the example of something. So we're all the example of something, whether we like it or not. Someone is the example when you meet them. You're like, oh, they're clearly the example of strength. They lift weights all the time, clearly. They have large defined muscles. You don't need to talk to them or ask them about anything. They are the example of strength. And someone else let's say that they're a librarian and they're just the sweetest person in the world, and like they're the example of compassion. And again, you don't need them to say that. You don't need anyone else to say it. You just know it because they are it, right? They not only do they probably identify it as it, but they just are it in all of their actions. Just like we talked about before with service. Once you decide to take the path of service, you decide to become it. And so if someone feels the soul calling to be of service, to be a teacher, a mentor, a healer, whatever the case may be, I believe one of the best things that you can do is decide to become the example of it. And that's going to involve working on yourself, and it's going to involve working on other people. But now all of a sudden, the focus isn't, am I filling my own cup or am I filling other people's cup? It is, this is a lifelong path that I've committed to. I will never fully check the box and say I'm doing this perfectly, but I am devoted to walking into figuring it out, what that looks like specifically for me, because it's going to be different for everyone. Some people require literally less sleep than other people. And so you look at this person's up, 4 o'clock every morning, and they're handing out, free sandwiches to people on the street. And, I need to sleep in till at least 7 to be able to even get up. Every single person's going to have a different path with different conditions. But if you decide to be it, if you decide to be service, if you decide to be sacred service, it's very difficult to go astray in the long term. And from a more practical standpoint, if you're a teacher or a coach or a healer in some capacity, some of your best medicine will come from figuring out your own example first, right? So a big part of my journey is I've figured out a lot of stuff in business. Now I'm surrounded by health practitioners, and I'm really curious to see, what does it look like for me to be my own example of health? Not relying on someone else to heal me or fix me or show me the way. And definitely I know some very smart people that are going to help me, but I'm committing to being my own example of it. And over the next 6 months, I believe that I'll probably, in a lot of ways, become unrecognizable. And in that time, I will figure out the roadmap that works for me, which then could become courses or programs or things I talk about on podcasts, or it could become a book. And so my own devotion to myself will become the frameworks and the roadmaps and the pieces of content that could possibly help people at scale as well. So
I love how you put that. That's a really good framework. For those of you who don't know, I will leave in the show notes information about Fit for Service. I believe it's Aubrey Marcus. There's a whole beautiful, beautiful offering and community. It'll all be linked below. So that'll be there. I don't want to forget to do that, so I want to put that in.
It's interesting because I've been obviously in a healing role for many years, and what I've found is there's always been this feeling I don't know enough, but it's I always seem to know enough for the person that is coming to see me, so it's maybe it might have been I learned that lesson 2 weeks ago or maybe a couple months ago, but it's now I just got that thing, and then you kind of evolve together, and you have this little pod of different souls and different people that you're working with that are attracted to you, and that kind of you get to support and mentor kind of along their journey, and so in a way, so to speak.
The micro and the macro is often how I view it. It's my internal work, my internal concepts, these things I'm contemplating, what I'm stewing on, is then presented. I believe it's Dean Graziosi who says, turn your mess into your message. And it's a really nice little saying. And I'm okay, what is mine and what do I know and what tools do I have? And we're all just walking each other home, as Rumi says.
I have a little addition to that quote or phrase as well, which I don't know where the original attribution is. If it is Dean, that's awesome, but I've heard it many different times in many different places. But the third little part of it that I really love is that your mess, the thing that you're helping and healing in yourself, becomes your message, the thing that you will likely be talking about at scale, which then eventually evolves into your medicine. So your mess is your message, is your medicine. Like literally, eventually, the thing that you've worked on yourself will be healing just in the fact that you are you. Like literally, for example, I'll use Alana for an example here. If someone is really, really suffering with migraines, obviously she has some modalities that she could help them with, but literally that person, just by being around Alana and by being around her frequency.
So true. It moves from that doing something to being, right? Out of that active, gotta fix, gotta do, to just sinking into that almost frequency of surrender and being. And it's a beautiful, beautiful additional piece. I didn't know the medicine part of that.
Totally. It's like the embodiment of it. I love that. Yeah. You just plant seeds with people just by your beingness. So cool. So I guess the next piece would be, what are kind of some of the biggest roadblocks that we see, maybe ego traps that people kind of come across when they're stepping into these roles, since I know you've worked with so many people in this regard?
It's typically found, I believe, in beliefs that are either conscious or unconscious, which is essentially these narratives that are running in their head in some capacity. One of them might be that I have to do this. Well, this is my call. I saw this in a vision, or my guide said this, and I have to walk this path. And as soon as we use an absolute like that, I have to, I must, there is a natural part of us, especially if someone is similar to the three of us, I'm guessing, there is a natural rebel inside that will begin to resist that. Like, I have to do it? Like, no, I don't think so. I don't have to do anything, right? And
Totally.
that little archetype is great friends with the saboteur. And I think you'll see a lot of people, they're like, I want to create a world, a new earth of freedom, a life of freedom. And at the same time, one of core beliefs is taking away a fundamental freedom of like, well, I have to do this. It's like, hey, like maybe you want to just become a real estate agent and make a ton of money and buy a yacht. That's actually an available path to you. You don't have to become a yoga teacher who specializes in crystal healing. You totally can. You can totally choose it, but don't pretend that you have to. And so I see that quite often, where there is this like this self-sacrifice. Like, well, I would have more money, but I got to go do another training in Peru about X, Y, and Z. I have to do this, have to do that. And it's sneaky, because it seems like it's rooted in like, I have to be of service. I am here. My soul is here, and I must do this. It seems noble. It seems to be in sacred service, but it's a tricky little belief. It's a tricky little part of the language that's running in our subconscious that keeps a lot of people trapped or self-sabotaging, because they also have this inner rebel that wants pure freedom and wants options, right? We all want to be able to choose, and just that subtle little shift from I have to I am choosing.
Yeah, it's a very empowering, subtle shift, of, oh, I have to do this, just puts the onus on something outside of you again, but saying, oh, I get an opportunity to, or I can choose to show up and create this way. There's that personal responsibility, I think, that is really closely tied into that.
It's a deep rabbit hole too, where, for example, they're like, okay, well, I don't have to be a yoga teacher, but there's some things that you just have to do. Like, I don't know, I have to pay my taxes. It's like, you don't actually have to. There might be repercussions or consequences.
I love this rabbit hole.
but you don't have to. And then someone's like, well, all right, okay, I get it. Well, I have to drink water. If I don't drink water, then I'm gonna die. Like, you're right on the second part, but you don't have to. You could choose to not drink water and then live with the reality of passing away. And so there's actually, I'm not an expert by any means, but I'm really fascinated with some of the gene keys. And
Hey!
one gene key in particular, gene key 55, that journey from victim to freedom is, I believe we're going to see that at large here over the next 2 or 3 years. And I think that's, what we're talking about here is most people are operating in some sort of victim framework, program, or consciousness, and they don't realize it. And it's keeping them from actually bringing their service to the world. And when they make that shift from victim to freedom, everything changes instantly. And I'm not saying it's an easy path to walk, but it's a really worthwhile North Star to consider.
I'm so excited you brought in the gene keys because it's such a good framework.
Totally. I was actually just going to say too, I was going to say like, that's like victim consciousness. Yeah. Like life's happening to you instead of for you. And it's a challenging place to shift out of because there's so many different levels to the victim. We've got the perpetrator and the enabler in there too. And it's all the same, it's all the same vibration, just a different role within it. And it's one of the hardest things I find to educate within my coaching with people is you have to tread lightly. So I do really like the way that you worded that because I think I might try and steal some of that verbiage because it sounds not like you're calling somebody a victim, because nobody wants to be called a victim or nobody wants to be called a perpetrator or enabler. It kind of puts up defenses and creates even more victim unconsciously. So thanks for
resistance.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Gene Key 55 and I think most issues on issues or most hot topics that are occurring these days, I think at the core level, you can put it in the transition of Gene Key 55 from victim to freedom. Whether that's the individuals who are involved internal dynamic or in the macro, like we were talking about, seeing it be really restrictive and really binding because, like you said, Alana, there's so many roles that we all play in that victim dynamic. And then you bring in the societal reinforcement, and without going too far down that rabbit hole, there's a lot of things that are really keeping us disempowered and stuck in that frequency. We just did part of Alana and I's Venus sequence we were just doing, my programming partner is with 55. So I feel like we just came out of a big contemplation about this specific gene key. And when you're contemplating something and you see it everywhere and you're like, oh dear, like one of those ones you're like, okay, this is a lifelong pursuit.
It's hard to shift out of that because like you said, freedom, like I know the gift is freedom and the city is freedom of that one. But it's also like shifting out of victim means taking responsibility. Like to have free will choice is like that's a lot of responsibility, like it's like you get to choose and like what are you going to choose, like that's scary for a lot of people. And so like I get why it's challenging. It can be a challenging shift to come out of that, to see and realize that what are you going to do about it because you have the choice. You have the freedom.
Yeah. And to see how many beliefs that you have as well about yourself that keep you stuck in the victim mentality was a doozy for me when I started contemplating that. Because I was like, from my framework when I was younger, it's like other people victimize other people, right? And then I'm like, oh man, I'm doing this to me. When I realized that in my later years, I was like, ooh. And there was a lot of juicy stuff in that dynamic of being like, oh no, I have beliefs around myself that keep me playing small so that I don't have to face the fear of the vastness of freedom and the vastness of potential, because I'd rather stay tiny than be standing in front of a cosmic void going, what do I want to do?
Now
what? Something that feels related to that, but also ties into where people get stuck, is the idea of morality, of things being right or wrong. And again, kind of referencing one of the core mythologies that we swim in of the Christian mythology, which is like there is a right way and then there's a wrong way. You're going to heaven or you're going to hell. And I believe a lot of people take on the title of healer or let's say light worker, and now they are in a cosmic battle, in the energy and the frequency of battle and war against the evil, against the bad guys or the bad girls. And that will likely keep someone stuck in the victim consciousness because you referenced Aubrey Marcus before. He puts it really well, talking about empire, which could be the structural force that is, governments or banking systems, whatever the case may be. And if you're going up against that as your opponent, they will, have infinitely more resources or weapons or whatever you want to call it. And so it's so easy to keep yourself as the victimized good hero fighting against the big evil forces of the world or the universe. And if you can zoom out a little bit and bring yourself just simply into the energy of light and dark, not good and bad, just there's light and then there's dark. Just that alone is a really profound shift for most people, where all of a sudden they don't see their least favorite politician as this like evil bad person. They are simply a soul playing a particular role in this grand play. Energies, look to balance themselves out. Or if we reference Rudolf Steiner, if you're a fan of his at all, we have the Luciferic forces on one side, on the other side, and then we have the Christic impulse, the Christ energy in the middle, the balance. And so I think in a lot of ways, if we're looking to be a person of sacred service or a healer or something in those spaces, what we're really striving for is to bring balance to ourselves, bring balance to our world, a little bit of the infinite light and abundance and healing, and a little bit of the structure and the numerical approach, and meeting somewhere in the middle where nothing is necessarily good and evil, but there's simply energy. There's simply the reality of the infinite cosmic soup, the quantum field, the great divine that is manifesting in different ways. So, example.
I imagine you would have a lot of experience having to walk people through that dynamic. Wow. I feel like you just brought up so many topics that I want to go down. And I'm like, ooh, yeah. Let's talk about, what anchors in. It's such a good reminder, because it's something that's actually been really alive for me in the last few weeks, has been anchoring in, almost like putting my fence post down or my little flag post down and be like, no, I'm going to hold this line, and then how much resistance that creates. So no matter if it's from the dark end of the spectrum or the light end of the spectrum, if you anchor yourself in a solid position and then you've decided that there's forces moving towards you or against you, and you take yourself out of that flow, of that allowance, of that natural ebb, you're creating truly like a point of just resistance, whether it's coming from, I've started to be able to find shadow in things that I considered the light, because I was hanging on to my point so hardcore. And it's like, it's such a good reminder that it is all an energetic spectrum. There's shadow, there's light, and the morality, like you said, is often brought in, especially in the Western civilization, because of the Judeo-Christian construct, structure of sin, good, bad, right, wrong.
I think what a lot of people don't realize too is that like we talk about this, but if somebody's like new to spirituality, like these are all subconscious things, like it's, if you try to talk to somebody from the conscious place, if this is subconscious, they're not going to see it really, right, until they're willing to dive in and see this. And so like you were saying, Melanie, of like you're finding like within your light, within your judgments, your moralities, your opinions, your pendulums or your polarities that you have, you're finding the shadow kind of within that too. It's like, you don't know the multiple of these kind of paradoxes and intermingling with each other. It's like you said, that politician we see that's evil. It's like, we don't understand what they have, what they hold that's conscious and unconscious, and what they've learned and we've learned in all of our different paths and things. And yeah, I definitely contemplated this morality quite a bit. I do have the gene key with the shadow of judgment in my profile a couple times there. So it's definitely a big one. Another one that I would say is very relevant in today's society for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, relevant for society, and also again in this group of individuals that are called to sacred service. A lot of people are saying like, hey, I have the answer to that.
And how do you deal with that in like a marketing perspective when you're, you look at social media? That's how most people market things, is through that exact process that you just described.
That's true.
And
we're struggling with that right now.
Yeah, like finding that way to have that message really out there in a way that is aligning with people, but not so polarizing, not so stuck on one side or the other of this is good and this is bad and this is right and this is wrong. But our mind, that's how our mind works. It's zeros and ones. It's a computer, and most people are living from the mind. So it's interesting to kind of balance and find that space where we can, bring people into their hearts and speak from that place more.
Mm-hmm. And also, I would say, like, I don't want to stop people from taking action or speaking because they're afraid to, be acting out of a judgment. So what I would say is, like, hey, like, maybe it's okay to be polarizing, but just say, like, in my opinion or in my experience, this, it might be different for you. But if you're interested in what I've done or the path I've walked or it resonates with you, I'm more than happy to show you my way. I'm more than happy to show you.
That's true.
Yeah,
and
that's
you're moving out of the absolutes again, right? I love that.
And I think that's really the only way to do it, because I believe that there's no one way, there's no one right way, and all you really can do is be like, this is what I have. I've done this. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work, and just have the bravery, the courage to show up authentically and not need to preach yourself like you've arrived to a certain level of experience or knowledge, especially within the spiritual community. A lot of these things don't necessarily have credentials, and we're used to working in a world where we work off of credentials and they have these letters and these names and this amount of years, and it's like, this is what I have, this is who I am, this is what my soul's got to show you. And that's why, again, I come back to, if you want to learn how to walk home with me, I will walk beside you the whole way. Let's go together.
Yeah, and I'm totally open to the idea that actually I thought home was that way, but it's actually the other way. But
oh my God.
Like
just circles.
Like that could be the case. So I think it's always coming back to, like, giving everyone their own freedom and agency. Like, hey, you're your own human being.
Totally. The responsibility, the autonomy, the co-creator, right? I think I can say for probably most of us is that we believe that we are co-creating with life. And that's one of those pivotal switches that happens, I think, when people start to take this path, is that I'm showing up and I am living from the inside out. I'm not having things happen to me. I am participating in the way my life unfolds. I interact with the forces around me, and I am now in co-creation. And even that little pivot that can occur empowers you to show up in a different way when you're on any path of service, to not follow somebody else's, but to live from the inside out and to say, hey, I can learn this lesson and I can make adjustments and I can do this. And I'd like to, if you don't mind, telling us a little bit about what that looks like in your personal life at home, because like you said, you're a father, a fairly new father, you're a husband, and Alana and I are evidently both women. So it would be lovely to have a masculine perspective just on what being of sacred service looks like for you in your life, and how you bring this concept that we can talk about in the spiritual community or in business or on the larger macro scale. What are some of your really gentle, subtle ways of being of sacred service in your everyday life? Because for me, that's where a lot of the juice lies, in that everyday mundane magic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if I spoke to the home environment, my wife and I enjoy the dance of being in the polarities of, like, she loves being in the feminine energy, and I, naturally enjoy being in the masculine energy. So that could be different for different families or different couples, but for us, that's what feels good. That's what works well. And so, for the past 5 years, I've been doing various forms of men's work, and I would say that work alongside of my own path has really given me a useful framework to apply or to utilize on a day-to-day basis, where in my home I am more than comfortable and capable of taking on some traditional roles, one being the protector of the space. I have no problem being the protector of our home. Simple things of, at night, my wife doesn't think about going around to lock the doors. Like, I've already done that. If there was like a random noise, like, I'm going to check it. I am more than happy playing that role. And that feels like one of the ways that I can be of sacred service to my family, to my wife and to my daughter. And so there's lots of different things that that show up on a day-to-day basis that would apply to that similar example of locking the doors. Um, like super mundane every week experience is I'm the one that takes out the garbage. And that's something that makes my wife really happy, something that she doesn't enjoy doing, and something that I don't mind doing. And it's not a luxurious job, it's not an exciting job, but I do it with a smile on my face, and I do it in the heart, in the energy of service. So those are kind of just some little examples, but I love that you brought up the idea of like the day-to-day mundane, because I do look to bring that energy into every experience that I do, even when I'm not, sitting in the middle of a jungle in a ceremony. Every day is ceremony. I think we really live that way in our home, where before we eat, we take deep breaths and we, give energy to the food, and we give reverence to where it came from. Everything is ceremony, and we're always looking to provide service to each other. And I think in that way, within the family environment, we think about it as like, okay, well, make sure that your own cup is full for sure. And then actually next comes the mother and the father. Let's make sure that our relationship is stable, because if that goes sideways, then our child doesn't have a family to exist in, or a house to exist in. And so we serve ourselves, we serve each other, and then of course, right immediately after that, we're being in service to our daughter. And I would say that family energy of service definitely extends out past our house. One of the ways that we live and we desire to continue to live and build on is having a very tight-knit community of other like-minded individuals and families, where that service definitely extends to them. So I'll use my business partner Dan and his wife and his two daughters as an example. Is like, if they need something, I'm there in service.
I love that. For those of you who don't know, his wife is Grace. She has a beautiful account, Conscious Queendom. She does beautiful hair services, and I just love her so much. And she totally does embody the feminine so much. So I love that you guys get to like play that balance. I love watching your relationship unfold, and with your new beautiful baby. I mean, not that new anymore, but I'm sure she's grown up fast. But beautiful family, and I'm sure one day you'll be teaching even from that aspect, because I think you guys have created a beautiful balance there.
Yeah, thanks for seeing us and saying that. And I mean, it's absolutely not perfect, just like anything else, right? Mm-hmm. It's taken us quite a while to calibrate those polarities, to find our place in the masculine and the feminine. And just as an example, for any men listening to this that operate in the space of, let's say, healing or being in a more intuitive role, the intuitive force, the connecting to that space, is inherently feminine. So it's a really interesting balance for myself to be able to dip in, to hold space, to open, to empathize, to be able to tap into my own feminine energy, and then to return to my home environment, to my family, coming back to this masculine edge that really does keep our polarity, it keeps our attraction. And like maybe some days I'm going to be more in my feminine.
It's a beautiful mandala too, because even just in that statement, you're talking about your internal dynamic and balance of masculine and feminine, which we all have. You're talking about how different parts of those archetypes, those traditional roles, those polarities can be pulled into different directions, especially in the business capacity. And then you have the alternative, which is the feminine. So then you have your business, which is masculine, and spiritual approach, which is innately feminine. So that in and of itself is a lot to balance. And then the container of a relationship, it's something, this polarity or the feminine, the masculine, is something Alana and I end up talking about a lot, because it's a useful archetype and tool to work with that balancing force that our world really needs right now, is getting acquainted with shifting and flowing within those energies in ourselves, but also allowing that flow and that balance within relationship or within business, and recognizing that this again, doesn't have to be something we stake a flag in, but something that we can flow with and utilize in many different ways. Lovely.
Yeah, it's almost kind of everything that you're doing, all of this sacred service work is kind of breaking the mold of like kind of that masculine business kind of system and idea that we hold in our minds of what is like currently kind of running the world. So it's kind of, yeah, and you're right, it is a balance between masculine and feminine. It is connecting the two, making the two be of service to each other. The feminine nurturing the masculine and the masculine being of service to the feminine and the protection. And it is that dance really within. So I think that's really cool that we kind of get to end a little bit on that note of bringing that into the conversation, because it is a big piece of that picture.
Especially that framework of service being a good framework to approach a lot of these conversations. How to be of service to your partner. If you can get too bogged down in the idea of masculine and feminine, how do you just serve the person that's in front of you? Maybe the archetypes are too big. Maybe all of the information is just too much. But how do I be of service to this person in front of me? Whether that's your partner or you're in ceremony or in a community of people. The service framework is something that I always love podcast topics, because of course I'm like, oh, I know I can talk about sacred service, but then it just starts to like mandala out and I'm like, oh, it's everywhere. There's so many more conversations to have. Well, I think that probably rounds out our sacred service podcast together. But Alex, I know you have offerings and things going on. If you want to let the listeners know where they can find you, if there's anything particular you have running right now or anything you want to share with them, give us the spiel. What do you have going on?
I appreciate that. Well, I have my own, private practice work that I do, just very deep one-on-one intentional work that bridges these worlds of the intuitive, energetic exploration, and how that intertwines and assists with an entrepreneur serving more people, experiencing more abundance themselves. So I always love to invite a couple people into that space to do that really deep, intimate work. Outside of that, I mentioned my business partner a couple times, myself and Dan Harrison. Our company is Soulful Sales, and we really look to bring this element of service into everything that we do. We have a couple different communities there, typically designed for a health coach or practitioner in some capacity that has a similar vision of the future that we do. So our communities are aptly named the New Earth Health Coaches, the New Earth Health Pros. And you can find those communities on School, but honestly the best place to connect with me is on Instagram. I find it to be a pretty friendly place to connect. So at alexander.ohm.official, and a couple little sneak peeks of side projects that I'm working on. I mentioned that I'm going all in on my own health journey, so I'm going to be documenting that in some capacity. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but that's going to be really fun. And then this idea of being the example, I am probably going to be launching a project around that concept or that idea. So
yes, coming soon.
Beautiful. Yeah, so exciting. I'm so excited about all these topics now. So of course, I will link everything where you can find Alex's information below. Thank you so much for coming on. It was absolutely a pleasure to have an opportunity to chat and connect with you for me for the first time. And I'm happy Alana was able to bring you into Alchemia's space. Like he alluded to, we do have some conversations of things in the works for this summer, probably geared around being of service. Maybe we'll dive a little bit more into that feminine and masculine polarity. We'll see what comes up, what is alive for us. And that will be it for this episode of The Sacred Seat. Thank you, Alex. Alana, always a pleasure, my love. And we will connect with you all shortly.
A pleasure, for sure.